You are now unmuted.
Thank you, guys. For anyone I haven't met yet, just probably a few of you, I'm Meg from the iMoot team. Just here to introduce Paul to you this morning. Paul's session is called Developing a Course in the Open. Paul's got a lot of experience working with different people and different needs with Moodle, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes when a course is designed in the open. Thank you, Paul.
Great. Thanks very much, Meg. And thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning, this evening, wherever you may be. Can everyone just let me know if the audio sounds okay by giving me a little message there in the chat box? That would be great. Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay. So I hope to harness some of the brain power that we have in the presentation room tonight. So we're obviously going to be talking about open, and we're going to be talking about specifically developing a course in the open. But before we start, I'd like to hear from you with how you think open is defined. What does open mean to you in the field of education? I'd love to see your thoughts on that. Thank you. Give you a moment to think about it, and then you can text in the chat box. What does open mean to you? Okay, thanks, Lynn. I see one item here, transparent to stakeholders. Thanks for sharing. Good work. 3, thank you. Out where people can see things. That's great. Thanks, Paula. Meg, see through. Thank you. Meredith, agree with Paula. Okay, great. Stephen, share. Great, thank you. I find it always pretty interesting to ask people to describe open, because as we can see from the responses, yeah, there are some commonalities, but there are also some different ways to think about it. So when I think of open, I think of things much like what you've described. But I also thought, and I find it interesting to think about the different aspects of open. Here's what I kind of mean. So you can have an open result, meaning that what is produced by something is available for people to see. You can have an open price, which I kind of think means free. You can have a culture that's open, open to ideas being shared, open to collaboration, those kind of things. Open network, where you have equal access to people, not through a hierarchy, but through meaningful connections. And the one that I find personally most interesting, and of course connected with this presentation tonight, is open process. And right now I find there's a great buzz about open educational resources, which deserve all the love they get. But I think there's something that we're not talking about as much. And to me, it was really interesting to take the idea of open and being inspired by the open textbook movement, actually specifically here in BC, and think, how could I make the process of creating a course more open? And would that bring any benefits for me? Would it bring benefits for my students? And would it bring benefits about what's being actually created? So that was my question. And that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. I'm interested as well for you folks to see this list in front of you. Are there any other aspects of open that you might like to share on the chat box, or that you think I'm missing in terms of that list of the aspects of open? I'll give you a moment to reply. Ooh, evaluation. I like that, Stuart. I think that's a great idea. And actually, that will pop up a bit later on tonight. But I like that you highlighted that in terms of an aspect of open. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to share in terms of other aspects of open? Okay, so let's continue. And I think in addition to aspects of openness, there's also benefits and risks. Again, I think everyone talks about more the benefits, but I think we have to also account and understand that there are risks about being in the open. And now I'm going to be a little bit more specific. Maybe this list is general to you, but I made this list thinking about the risks and benefits of developing a course in the open. Honesty. when we're sharing our course with our colleagues, our respected peers, our students, maybe their parents, who knows who, you have to kind of be more honest with yourself about how good a job you've done with your course that's in the open. Accountability, it goes to you, being accountable for the content, the learning benefit, the style, everything to do with that course. Of course, collaboration is a great benefit. Being able to collaborate perhaps with your students before even the course is launched, which is something I'm going to hook into a little bit later on tonight. And also your peers, right? You have to be ready to be criticized. Once you put something out there in the open, yes, you might get praise, but equally and even more likely, sometimes you will be criticized, and you have to be comfortable with that and ready for it. And finally, interest. The time that you can draw actually more interest into your course could actually be even before the course exists, when you are openly developing the course and getting feedback from potential students, which could then affect enrollment. So those are my items that I've kind of thought about and identified about benefits and also risks of developing a course in the open. Again, I'd like to ask everyone in the room here, are there any other items that come to your mind? I'd love for you to share either a benefit or a risk if you choose to develop a course in the open. I'll give you a moment to think about that. Let me know if you have any items to share. And of course, in this case, I'll take silence as a good thing because that list is hopefully comprehensive. Oh, patience. Okay. Stakeholders are put in their 2 cents, even trying to help and get frustrated. It can really affect you. Yeah, that's true. And when you put a developing course in the open, you'll notice that it probably may take also more time than perhaps your old process, because you need to kind of externalize your thinking, you need to externalize your work products, and that can invest in more time. So thank you, Maren, for sharing your idea about patience as well. Okay. So making your progress visible. If you're going to try this technique of developing a course in the open, one of the first things you're going to come up across is, how do I make that progress visible for people? And so I've kind of identified 3 things I want to briefly talk about before I move on to our actual case study tonight. Channels, how you're going to communicate your progress. Structure, how are you going to share and communicate the structure of your course before it's even created. And content, how could you share the content of your course? Channels is pretty straightforward. Basically, it's looking at what kind of social media channels are you perhaps using yourselves. What kind of social media channels are your audience that you hope to reach with your course in the open being developed? So for me, Twitter definitely is my #1 channel that I've used, and you're going to see that in the case study. LinkedIn, of course, Google Plus for those certain circles that are in it, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and there's probably others, but definitely you can see that there's a lot of options for us now to kind of communicate our progress in terms of developing a course in the open. So that's a pretty straightforward list, I think. The second item, though, is structure, and I'd love to hear from you now. What is your current favorite method to map out your course structure? So don't worry about developing a course in the open yet. I'm just asking, in terms of when you develop a course, do you like to work at structure early on? And if so, what's your favorite method to map out your course structure? I'd love to hear anybody who would share their kind of favorite technique for mapping out a structure of a course. Michelle, thank you. Storyboarding. Okay, I'm trying to find a method that is efficient. I get tied up in the detail. Fair enough, but storyboarding, I like that. So I'm just making a note of that as we go through. I learn through these things. Anybody else have a technique they'd like to share? Got instinct previous experience. Thanks, Stuart. For sure. And a lot of us who've been teaching for a while internalize a lot of this stuff. And that's when it gets interesting. When you start to develop a course in the open, you can internalize and still get feedback. You have to externalize, right? So, but I hear you for sure, Stuart. It's a good comment. Anybody else like to share a method they use to map out course structure? Aaron, thanks. In-house wiki. Aha, very nice. Okay, and mind mapping. Ooh, one of my favorites for sure. All right. So here's a list of my favorite or structure techniques that I've seen in the past. Outlines, kind of like text outlines. I use a tool called Workflowy, which is a cloud-based tool, which you're going to see some samples of, so you can share it with colleagues. Post-it notes, that was suggested in an earlier session of this presentation. And I use post-it notes for all kinds of techniques in user experience design. And for sure, I can see it's a nice technique as well to kind of structure a course. Tree diagrams, another technique if it's more hierarchical, or mind maps, and that was mentioned previously. So these are some common techniques that I've either seen or have personally used in terms of structure. And each of these techniques has an online component, a version, if you will. So you could externalize and share with an audience as you develop your course in the open. And lastly, we have course content. Now, this could be the readings of the course. It could be discussion topics you plan for your students. It could be activities and exercises you get them to do. Of course, it could be your slides. And as well, if you're making a website for the course, that would be content as well. So all of these, as you can see, are very shareable, and not only for your students, but also as you develop the course. So you've kind of got channels, structure, and content. And these are the three main components as I see them in terms of trying to share your course as it gets developed. So let's just take a little quick break here. We've covered so far sharing the different definitions of open that we all have, which is really good to see. And then we talked about the different aspects of open, open network, open result, and the last and most important one for this presentation I thought was open process. And then we looked at some benefits and risks of developing a course in the open because, again, certainly there's things to gain, but there's also some risk for us when we share our work in public. And finally, that idea of channel, structure, and content, and how to make your progress visible when creating a course in the open. So before I start our first case study, with lots of examples, I'm looking forward to your feedback and comments as we go. Does anybody have any questions or comments with what we've discussed so far? I'll give you a moment. All right, well, let's then continue, and I will share with you two case studies, and we'll kind of gauge how much detail you want to go into each one. So let's start off with the first case study. So I got the idea for developing a course in the open, and by the way, it can be a closed course, right? So in this case, I developed in the open a 13-week university course that was not an open course itself, but it won't stop you from developing a course in the open, even if the actual participants of the course are only a select few, right, people? So I teach a user interface design course at SFU University here in Vancouver, Canada, 13-week course. And last summer, I was inspired to try to do this in the open. I've taught the course many times. I've internalized a lot of things, but I thought, what would happen if I tried to actually externalize the redevelopment of this 13-week course? I started off in Twitter. I started off by thinking about, well, what would be a draft topic list and a draft reading list for my course? I used a tool called Workflowy, which you can check out. And all the tools I use, I'll share with you in a little slide at the end of the presentation. And Workflowy is a nice outline tool that lets you share with your colleagues and anybody your outlines and for them to have feedback and comments on. And so that was my first step. And I'll just show you here, the next slide is that Workflowy outline. So you can see that you've got a course map kind of thing here, right? You've got weeks, you've got main topics for each week, you've got the articles that I plan to use. And that's the start of sharing something in the open. The nice thing was it was quite a digestible structure, being an outline. I could include links to actually go to the readings. You can probably see where I'm going here, right? It kind of is a nice way with a low effort, to be honest, right? Um, in trying to kind of map out the structure and to give a sense of what's in the course. That was topics for reading is the main focus along with the main course topics. And then for myself, the next thing that I developed was a prototype. Not a full site, but a prototype of the course companion. And this happens to be a multi-device course companion in WordPress. Don't pillar me for that. I do Moodle stuff as well. But this just happened to be in WordPress. And I put it out there because, I'm teaching user interface design. It's important that my students see that I can actually design something. So there's more than one reasons why I chose to put a prototype course companion out as an early first step to externalize the process of designing and developing this course. And in this course prototype, there was actually a section called a UX Techniques Guide, which is, intended to be very learner-based. It was intended to be actually a performance support style tool where you could, for instance, see, how can I, learn more about the needs of my audience, let's just say. And they could click on that topic, and that accordion would expand, and they'd see all kinds of different ways that they could, it's how to apply a user-centered design process. But you get the idea, right? Different techniques with a brief definition and links. Again, notice that I'm not creating my own content so much. I'm assembling what I can find around the web that I think is the best of different types of content and putting that out there in the open to benefit people who don't even take the course, right? That's a good sign. If you can create a course companion that you can make public that benefits actually people not even taking the course, I think that's the right sign that we're making something valuable for our students. Because then it's almost, how can that not be valuable if you're also taking the course and having access to that course companion? So that was another early element that I shared in my open course development process. And then the next thing I did is I actually shared some work templates that I created for students to use, creating what is called a persona for their project, a user story, a task inventory. These are all fairly industry standard tools if you know about UI design. And I put them up on SkyDrive, and I made that available. So again, as someone looking at this from outside, they can start to see the content of this course literally coming together. And again, always looking for feedback, right? Very important. And in fact, this was almost magical. This happened. I actually, next slide, sorry. And this is a more detailed thing. Now you can see that I'm putting in assessments, and I'm putting in actually readings, presented material, handouts, exercises. You can see more detail now starting to be produced into what I would call the course map for the classes. So I just continue this process of putting more detail into my course plan that I shared with people, and also the learning objectives. And I'll be honest, I've taught this course so many times, I've really internalized the learning objectives. This was the first time that I tried to externalize them. And of course, great, the first time I try to do this, it's in public, right? So, I'm sure you folks probably give me some critical feedback on my learning objectives, but I just felt that, wow, how could I be developing this course in the open with not actually detailing the learning objectives in a more formal manner than I usually did just by doing this in a closed environment. Can you tell already that this changed the way that I developed this course? The fact that I started to share what I was doing actually then influenced and changed what I was doing as I went through this process. And this was that magical moment I was talking about. Somebody was actually reading some stuff. I got a Twitter reply from Mark Gaiman, and he actually gave me some feedback that he was following this process and that he was getting some value. So this made me feel really good, because then I thought, well, not only am I getting value from doing this in the open, and hopefully I'm going to have my students, that'll be a topic coming up soon, by the way, getting my students to see what's going on and give me feedback, but if I can also help and share others involved in course creation, even better, right? Because I would love to learn from all of you some of your techniques and some of your processes, how you design a course, and that will help me design a course even better. So that was, I call it the voice from the wilderness. That gave me some more motivation to continue the experiment. So I continued the experiment. I created assignments outlining what was going to be involved in them. I also created a mind map of topics, concepts, and principles. I've never done that before for a course. The reason I did it is because it's like, okay, I'm trying to document this course under development. How do you document in detail without overloading somebody at the same time? What are you going to talk about? I came up with this idea of a concepts, techniques, and principles inventory. And for user interface design, almost everything is a concept, a technique, or a principle. And so this is a great way to actually kind of do a grand vision of what this course was going to touch upon in more detail than 6 or 7 learning objectives, but not in terms of 25 or 35 readings that you have to go through to distill that. I did it as a mind map. Looking back, I learned so many lessons. I wouldn't do it as a mind map again because there are just too many elements. I would probably, and I did it in the second pass as an outline. But anyway, the idea is to do a concepts, techniques, and principles inventory. And then I thought, what I really want to do next is I want to have my potential students see this. Just think about it. If the students, even before they register for your course, can see the course that they might be interested in being created in the open, they are going to have such a better idea if they want to take that course. You know what it's like? Students see this little 3 or 4 line calendar description. Usually it's the same for each prof. If there's a course detailed description, it might be half a page long. How much can you really get from that? But if you can see the course being actually created in the open, and furthermore, as a student, give feedback and influence the shape of that course, influence the content of the course, then that's like a learner-centered approach to course development, which really excited me. So I sent this tweet to the Faculty of Science at SFU to share, and letting students know that if they're registered in CMPT 363, that they could see all the course materials and draft for preview and feedback. And amazingly enough, I started to get a little bit of sign of life from potential students. And so this was a challenge, though. I didn't get as much feedback as I was hoping, but at least I started making a few connections. So this inspired me to take it to the next step. So in our university registration system, before class starts, I have access to the registered student list. So what I thought I'd do, call me brave or call me stupid, is that I drafted this letter and I used the emails of all the students that were registered for the course in August, and I sent them this message. And if nothing else, they could self-select if the course is right for them. That was the idea. Optimistically, I wanted them to actually give me critical feedback. In retrospect, like if you were a student and you had a new professor do this for you, would you feel comfortable criticizing his or her work before you even met them? So I didn't actually get the critical feedback I was hoping for, but I got self-selection. A student could decide whether it was a good match or not. I'm just looking at Stuart's comment here. Thanks, Stuart, for putting that in. I like the prototype approach. We launched new courses as a pilot run course, 50% fees. Oh, good idea. Okay. And then the course changes to next run, not as open as your process, though. Okay, but you've definitely got that in spirit, right? And by putting a prototype in the open, I think, as you can see, you can even get more feedback and more opportunity for change as well. And in terms of being a WordPress site, I actually made a clone of my prototype and then continued to work on it. So actually, the prototype lives as a live, this is what it was, and then the course site, which you have the URL for actually in a few slides earlier, that actually is what the course became once the students were involved, and of course that brings a whole other layer of modifications. So that was my attempt at getting some early student feedback, but like I say, it more ended up as a self-selection, which was fine. I was happy with that. This is almost about the end of this case study. I shared a diagram of the design process that we'd be using in the course and a list of all the tools that we'd be using. And this was a tool called Glyphy, and this was almost at the end of the development process. As you can see here, wow, I mean, I've got things pretty defined, right? So just another example of a way to share the process. And then, of course, the term began, and the course site changed quite a bit, of course, based on student feedback and all that. And somebody earlier on in the text chat mentioned open evaluation, and indeed I was inspired to do that. So I publicly shared my students' evaluations with the course. You know, I've never done that before, but it just felt right because this whole thing was out in the open, this whole process of designing the course, then even though the course was registered, then students only had particular access. I kept a lot of the course site open to the public, and then it was like, okay, let's just go all the way, and I shared my evaluations online. And like I say, it just seemed to be the right thing to do. So, things I can share with you, lessons learned, right? So it was a game changer. I mean, really, I've shared kind of some things along the way with you, but it forced me, first of all, to just articulate, never mind better articulate, my learning objectives. So shame on me for not having them earlier, but that's the way it was. It made me rethink the course development process. Again, shame on me. I had a tendency to put content, really focused on content early on and less from student activities. And as you'll see in the next case study, our last case study, by the way, I kind of shifted that and put the focus on activities first, content second. Twitter was a great tool to share in-progress items, and LinkedIn seemed to be a better tool for final versions. People were more accepting of more tweets, of draft stuff, I found. Reaching the intended studio audience was a challenge. As you saw, I tried with Twitter, I tried the email, I did connect, but I wish there was a way that was a standard way to connect with your potential students before a class began. And also, you naturally raise the bar when anyone can see your work. So when you make your work public, I'm not saying I was a slouch before. I'm just saying that honestly, because it was all there for my professional colleagues to see, my potential clients to see, my potential students to see, you just try harder. And that's just being honest. Looking at Meredith's comment, can't tell our names visible. No. So names are not visible on the evaluations. All the evaluation material I shared was anonymous because it's compiled and the data is then shared with me as an instructor. So I was able to share the evaluation data but not have any particular students related to that. So great. Okay, I think I answered that question. So those are some top lessons learned from the case study you just saw. So let's have a little break here and let you kind of digest that. Do you have any questions what you've seen so far? Do you have any questions with any of the tools or techniques I've shared? Do you have any questions about what kind of responses I had? I'll give you a minute to think about that, and I'll look for your questions in the chat box. Thank you. Oh, so actually the course site is live still, so you can actually visit it. Let me just see if I can quickly bring it up for you in the message box. So here's the URL for the course site, and it is still open and public. Stuart says, I agree, any level of openness raises the standards. The worst courses are by teachers working in isolation. Certainly, and also for so many reasons, because again, we need to learn from each other. This is why I would love to have more instructors develop their courses in the open, because I'm looking for learning opportunities to improve my own course development, right? So it's helpful, I think, for other instructors to learn from instructors. I think it's helpful for the instructors themselves to raise their own bar, to try harder, to do better, and I think it's better for our students so they can see courses more detailed before they decide to sign up and commit. 13 weeks is a big amount to commit. And Maren makes a good point, definitely Some institutions are more siloed, and depending on your culture, this may not fly. Now, to be honest, I'm a sessional instructor, so while I'm part of the university, I'm not part of faculty, and this actually can be a hardship, but it can also be an advantage, right? So I kind of used it as an advantage and trying to do more things in that freedom. Oh, Xmind for sure. Thank you, Child, for mentioning that. I've seen Xmind before. It has desktop application clients, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, for Windows and Mac, and you can also share mind maps online. So thanks for the mention of Xmind for sure. That's a good one. Okay, a few other people know. Excellent. Oh, Linux as well. Thanks for knowing. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing. Any other questions or comments? The second case study is fairly brief. It's not as long as the first, and then we'll wrap up. But if there are any other questions about the 13-week university course case study, I'll give you another moment here. I'll see if there's anything else coming up through the chat window. Okay, let's continue for our second and final case study of the presentation then. This was actually done after this experience that I went through for my 13-week course. This was for a 3-week adult education course. This was actually a course that I put on, ironically, about designing multi-device learning experiences. And I was pretty energized by my experience with making the SFU course development open. So I thought, what would I experience if I made this adult education 3-week course process open, and what would I do differently? That's what I was wondering myself, right? So I started off the same way. I started off with a tweet, and I kind of included, using Workflowy, a course description, and also an outline. You'll see it coming up right here, of content, techniques, and principles. So this time around, things were just faster for me because I had already kind of established some basic techniques of how I would share stuff and the structure I was talking about. And so this came out a bit easier. And then I thought even of doing this, right, where for the concepts, techniques, and principles inventory, I'd actually indicate what session was there. So this turned into, for me personally as an instructor, a helpful tool to help me kind of map out the flow of the course in addition just to the isolated topics of the course. So that was kind of like a progression for me from my first attempt. And I came up with the idea of themes, okay? So a theme is where I try to kind of condense a whole bunch of maybe concepts, principles, and techniques into an idea. It's not a learning objective, as you notice, but it's something that I can share to get the essence of what I'm going to talk about, you know? So for instance, in fundamentals, I talk about and explore the many meanings of mobile and mobile learning, you know? I talk about and explore design thinking, being for educators too. So trying to make a little bit more enticing, if you will, a little bit more interesting way to kind of describe what the course is going to be about. Because honestly, sometimes my learning objectives I find are kind of dry and kind of lacking in inspiration and spirit. So I thought I'd try this idea of themes. And that seemed to help me anyway. And then as well, I came up with the idea of posting the course description on Google Docs and allowing people to comment on it. So kind of, again, exploring, okay, it's one thing to share something, but can I share it and then get people to comment on it and maybe help me kind of refine it, right? So I didn't get any uptake. I didn't get any actual comments. But again, like I said, part of the challenge here is connecting with the right audience. How do you connect with your course audience before the course? That's the challenge that I think is still there. And also, it depends on your personal learning network and how many colleagues and peers are teaching similar courses. I'm a sessional, so I don't have that many opportunities. I think if you were a faculty member, you'd have more opportunities, I think, for that. But that idea of allowing people to actually make comments directly on your externalized course development materials is a powerful one. And I also, if you remember a couple months back, they introduced this new feature in Twitter that allowed you to embed pictures and they would show up in your tweet history. So I tried to, make an image of the themes and then include that in my tweet to try to just make it easier for people to see these themes and maybe give me some feedback. And you noticed probably earlier on in the 13-week course I mentioned I shared all the activities on SkyDrive. And I did a similar thing here, but if you notice, we haven't seen any course content yet. So this is where I tried to actually create all the work products, all the activities and assignment project materials before I created real content for the course. This was very different for me to do. And I went one step further, and being inspired by the spirit of being open, I also put Creative Commons licenses in all my materials this time around. Because I designed these materials to be used by professionals who are going to try to do multi-device learning projects. And so these are actually work products that they could actually use, not just in the course, but I mean, hopefully in their professional practice, right? So that I was inspired by this whole open process, and I included these Creative Commons licenses in the work products themselves. So we're almost finished here. This second last case study. I then, created a prototype of the course companion for this 3-week course, pardon me, and I included the main topic pages. And still notice you haven't seen one slide for the course. Slides, actually, for the first time in my course development process, were the last thing that I created, which kind of surprised me, but that's just the truth. I created so much more than, I created almost everything else but the slides, and the slides came in last. So this was the multi-device. Now, by the way, this is a Moodle site, and tomorrow I'm going to be giving a presentation on multi-device learning experiences with Moodle, and I'll talk more about this site at that presentation. And I used Moodle's glossary feature to create a resource glossary, and I tweeted that. Because again, as a standalone resource that could be valuable for people who are interested in multi-device learning. And then, like I mentioned, the last thing that I did was my slides. So this was a very dramatic change for me personally in order to do that process, but it really worked out quite well in terms of I did everything else in terms of learning objectives, the topics, the activities for the students, the learning outcomes, and then once we have all of that, then I'll make the content for my own slides. And, not everything is roses. And in this case, I didn't get enough people interested in the course. The course didn't actually go through. But you know what? I was not really too down about that because I had learned so much about this process of developing a course in the open, and I knew all these resources were publicly available, and I knew people were using the course website because I could see the stats of that, even though there was actually no course going on. And that course website is also still available, and I'll just put that in the message box here for you in just a second. And I'm going to use that design in the future, but I didn't happen to use it for the particular course that I was hoping for. But like I say, it wasn't for waste because people could already use that course site, and I knew people were already doing it. Okay, so just about wrapped up here. Some top lessons learned from that second attempt. I found that even for continuing studies courses, which are traditionally even more closed than university courses, I find, developing a course in the open was applicable and of benefit. It really solidified my change to activities first. In other words, creating the things I want my students to do before I actually create any content for the course. Again, I'm just admitting here my process. Maybe most people do it this way, and it took me a while to figure it out. And from now on, I don't even realize, I can't even think of doing a course in closed. Right now I'm actually preparing to teach my UI course again at Simon Fraser University. I'm going to be doing a brand new version of that course in September, and once I get confirmed news from the Computing Science School, I'm going to start developing that course in the open. It's going to be a version 2 of what you saw for the previous 13-week course example a while ago, but I'm really looking forward to doing that. And hopefully maybe some of you might be following me on Twitter, and maybe I'd love your critical feedback on my approach of doing this course refresh. I'm going to be using Canvas, by the way. I always like to try different LMSs. I've used WordPress, I use Moodle, I use Canvas, but anyway, that's another topic. So those are the top lessons I learned. And here are some next steps for yourselves. If you're interested, here's a list of tools that I use during the process. MindMeister is like XMind. It's like an online mind mapping program. Workflowy is creating outlines. Glyphy is creating diagrams. Google Docs is a way for you to get comments from descriptions of courses. And Slides.com is an HTML slides program, very multi-device friendly, and I use that a lot for my course content. And there's also the link for Creative Commons licenses in case you might be inspired yourself to provide open remixing and open usage of your course materials. So I'm looking forward to some questions and discussions from you all. There are my contact details. Like I say, if you follow me on Twitter and you're interested in seeing another example of this open course development process, I'm going to be starting probably in about a month. I should get word from the school in terms of confirmation that my course is going to go ahead. And I've already got some ideas of some different things I'm going to try and do all that in the open. And all of the links in the previous slide and these links are on the course page for this presentation on the iMoot site. So I'm going to shut up for a few minutes here, and I would like to offer you to ask any questions or share any thoughts or comments that you have. And I'm also going to take a look at some of the comments that you've already been adding to the chat. Thanks. I'll just do that for a second. Oh, great. Thanks, Child. I'm glad that looks good. And yeah, I believe my presentation is tomorrow, and the presentation is called Designing Multi-Device Course Moodle Site. So I think it's sometime tomorrow scheduled. Stuart, thanks very much for your comments. Wow, New Zealand Moodle Moot in October. Wow, that would be quite an amazing trip. So sure, you never know what could be arranged. But thank you for thinking of me. That's very kind of you. Oh, so what am I trying to do next? So my one of the main things that I picked up through this kind of developing Moodle sites for multi-devices is that performance support is a very key component. You know, when our students can access our course materials at any time, anywhere, that includes actually when they're trying to solve problems. That includes at the time of apply, as it's usually said, right? So this time around, I want to add a personalized mentoring component to my course, where students through their course companion can have a one-on-one virtual mentoring room, if you will, with me, where I can help them in a more personal manner through the course content, in addition to the usual stuff that we do with the course site, and also looking at peer grading of assignments. This is something I want to try, and rubrics. So it's probably another session topic there, but those are just some of the ideas that I have that I want to try out. And these will all be externalized starting in a couple of weeks once I get going here and I start creating the next course site. I hope that answers your question, Maren. So what are your thoughts? Any experience in creating a course in the open of anybody who's in the session, or any questions that you might have or comments? Hey, Michelle, that's great. Wow, you didn't waste any time. That is awesome. If you're on Twitter, please follow me and I'll follow you back, and I'd love to see what you're going to be doing. I would love to learn from you to see what kind of things you come up with. And yeah, I mean, like I say, once I put it out in the open, I found activities were just a nice natural way to try to externalize what is the course going to do for you as a student. You know, they're very digestible that way, rather than a whole bunch of our more, learning objectives I find are sometimes not so focused on the learner, but they're more helpful to us, to be honest. But doing activities first really kind of changed that up for me quite a bit. Yeah, and definitely, again, in a way, it was nice that I didn't get too much feedback, to be honest. It was like I was doing this in the open. I was learning as I was going. I was definitely raising my own personal bar. I was being more experimental, and I was getting just enough feedback to kind of keep me going and get motivated. It would be really interesting to maybe next iMoot, when more people have done this approach and they're sharing what they've learned, I wonder what happens when you get a lot of feedback. Wow. You know, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like it's what I would like, but maybe you get overwhelmed. So that would really be interesting for someone to do a case study in the future. Oh, thanks very much, Stuart. And sure, it'd be lovely to get in touch with you sometime. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? I'll be hanging out here for a few more minutes. I, again, really appreciate you joining the session tonight. It was great to hear your comments and questions and feedback. I was learning a lot from all of you, which was great. So I'll just hang out for a couple more minutes and give you a chance to digest things. And if you have any other questions, you can always email me or contact me by Twitter later on. And like I said, all these links will be available on the course page on the iMoot site for this session. Thanks very much for all your time.
Thanks for that course, very interesting. Of course, going to hang around for a little bit to answer any final questions, but thanks everyone for coming. All the info will be on the course page, and we'll see you guys next session.
Thanks very much, Meg, and thanks again everyone who attended. Thank you. I'll just hang out for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.